of different stuff about beds, pillows, and blankets from PPL special collections today. There's kind of a lot of it, so I'm going to move through it fairly quickly, but if there's something that people have questions about or want to talk about more, by all means, let me know and we can pause on those items. And then, yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about what each thing is. If you have questions for me about the item, more about it, more context, please let me know. And then if you have more questions about blankets and textiles or context for Priscilla, also please drop that in the chat. So the first thing that we're looking at today, this is a photograph from our Rhode Island photograph collection. There's not a ton of information about this, but this is a picture inside the Rhode Island State Prison, which at the time that this photo was taken was in Providence. I think actually, I'm pretty sure this was taken around the time that the prison was fairly close to where Providence Place Mall is right now. And this is a really interesting photo to me because it is one of the only photos I could find of local beds that are historic, presumably because people don't usually take photographs of the private spaces in their homes. And by the time that photography was becoming widespread, a bedroom was considered sort of a private domestic space, so not something that you'd necessarily be photographing. But Priscilla and I were talking earlier about how much is going on in this photograph. You know, the fact that we're seeing this kind of intimate, homey space inside of a prison is really interesting. You also can see there's like paintings hung above each of the beds. It's a little hard to see, but they look maybe like oil paintings, which I'm not sure if that was sort of a widespread thing that was being done in prisons in general at the time, or if that was specifically something they were trying at this prison to cheer things up.
It also feels like, yeah, just to, sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
Like the way that it's like curated for like, oh, we'll put the, well, like you clean your room when you're going to take a picture. And obviously in that era, like photography was so like, yeah, like precious that like, I'm imagining what it would look like on a day to day. And I don't think this is it. I think this is like spruced up for the visual of like, see, they're safe and happy and sitting, you know, in this cage.
Yeah.
Where the reality is like probably more chaotic looking.
Yeah.
I don't know.
This is also interesting to me because a lot of the other beds we're going to look at today are very regal, because that seems to be the kind of bed that people are interested in photographing or making a print or an engraving of. So this is the least cozy bedroom we're going to look at today. Priscilla, do you want to add anything else about this really complex picture that we're starting with?
Yeah, I mean, it just reminds me of that sort of like standardized like thing of like those spaces for prisons, and basically like you're not, there's like not a lot of private, there's no private space. And then that is also like in the corner, it says hospital room and inmates. So I'm wondering like the mixture of like the same architecture for psych wards or places with like that were hospitals, but they weren't really hospitals. They're like putting people away in packed spaces for like where one would be used to like private space of a bedroom. It's like the starkness of it. I don't know. This definitely makes me think a lot about it.
Yeah. Oh, and I think the lack of privacy in this bedroom is also an interesting thing for us to note. Just in terms of how we think about beds and bedrooms, because we'll also look at a few images that are in homes where beds are kind of in the main living space, but people have still found ways to create privacy. I'm going to keep moving along, but I feel like this might be one that we end up coming back to when we're talking some more, because there's so much happening here. So this is the other image I could find of some local beds of history. So this is inside the Betsy Williams cottage in Roger Williams Park, which anyone who lives or spends time in Providence has probably seen the exterior of this cottage, even if you haven't been inside. And this one, you know, doesn't look like it was made when people were living in the house, mind you. And we can look at the back of the postcard quickly. It doesn't really tell you anything else about the image itself, but it is a cool postcard. And I recently have been trying to figure out how to put a new mattress on a historic bed. And so I'm also interested in the kind of framing of what is clearly designed to hold up the mattress on this bed, which looks like maybe rope. But I feel like it's interesting because this is not a time, I think this bed is not from a time when box springs or anything like that were widespread as something that would hold your mattress off the ground. So Betsy Williams' bed. You may also notice that the adult size bed here is not very big, which is also something that I think has a lot to do with both social class and what was sort of the habit at the time. Now I want to show you some prints of much fancier beds. So this book, I'll show you the cover real quick. We're gonna have to do a little scroll back here just to fit the whole thing in. So this is a slightly beat up but very interesting folio from our Nickerson collection on art and architecture. And it's actually a 5-volume series of interior design, I think from the 1930s, as far as I could tell, late 1920s, early 1930s. There's not a publication date on it. They appear to be pochoir printed, which was, I'll show you a colorful one just so you can see what I'm talking about. It was a method of printing where there would be sort of a black and white printed outline and then layers of stencils that would go on. And I'm not 100% sure that that's the printing method here, but I'm pretty sure that's what's happening. And there are interior designs in here for some very stylish bedrooms. We're just going to kind of flip through this one a little more quickly. You can see here the same bedroom in a few different color options. This also is interesting because the color on it is still so vibrant, even though this is probably almost 100 years old. And then I also, a few more beds. I really like this integrated bed and bookshelf scenario. And then there was another one that I bookmarked in here because this has something that you actually don't see in design very much anymore, but was not uncommon when this was printed, which is a room that has 2 beds in it, which is also something that I think at other times has been more common, either having multiple beds in a bedroom or having a married couple that doesn't share a bed, or many children who share a room, or adults and children who share a room. And it's interesting that, these presumably are kind of, I'd say, fancier homes because they're showing up in an interior design book, but it was just really much more common at the time to see a designed room that had multiple beds in it that wasn't necessarily a room for children. Priscilla, do you have anything to add or any questions about that?
Well, no, I really love and appreciate the way that era of painting into how vibrant the colors are in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so this one, you can see the cover quickly. This is a book called Old Scandinavian Homes, also a folio from that same collection. And I couldn't really find any information about the person who wrote this book. It appears to have been self-published by the photographer. Oh, I'm getting a delay again. Okay. So this one, I'm actually going to zoom in on the image a little bit. Sorry for the sweater. But I picked this one because it has these really lovely images of these carved bed nooks or box beds. You can kind of see towards the upper left, like right here, which I think are just absolutely beautiful. And box beds like this were actually, from what I can find, pretty common all over Europe. Some of them had doors, some of them had curtains, and those were used to provide warmth. A lot of these homes were very, very cold or had an open fireplace that would let a lot of wind in the winter. And also the curtains or doors that would be on some of them. You can see this one's a lot more closed in. Also could provide privacy when there wasn't necessarily a separate bedroom in the home. So often there'd be sort of a central fireplace that's used for cooking, and the beds would be close to that for warmth. But then having them a little more closed in like this would give people a little more privacy in a shared bedroom or room that was used for both living and sleeping.
So beautiful. It's like a little room inside of another room.
I know, I love it. I wish that I had one of these in my cold, cold house. It's also interesting to me because there's, I guess, this kind of like stylish movement towards very open plan living. And so I wonder if things like this will become more popular again in the future when people are living in like these big, wide open, you know, renovated lofts. We'll see.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I have to take this off to grab the next thing. All right. So we're just going to look at this one briefly, but this is another lovely folio. And this one has the fanciest bed we're going to look at today. Not the biggest, but the fanciest. Right. So I wanted, we have a lot of images of tremendously elegant beds, and this is the one I selected for you all to look at because look at this bed. The canopy is nice. There's some pine cones happening here. Giant eagle keeping an eye on you while you're sleeping. Sorry, there's a little delay, so my hand and my voice are not doing the same thing. And then also these golden swans also keeping an eye on you while you're sleeping. Maybe there's some fruit baskets at the foot. This is just a bed not to be missed.
Yeah. The wildness of like designing something like that.
Yeah.
Like, what? Yeah.
I know. Yeah, and it's I'm assuming that it is carved and painted, and also the idea of being the person who's commissioned to carve swans onto the fanciest of fancy beds is really, really something. All right, that's the fanciest bed for today. I'm wondering if anyone knows anything about bed canopies. I feel like that's something that I didn't do a lot of research about, but that I'm very interested in.
Yeah, I don't know a lot. I know that that's like design wise, like there was an era where that, you know, the popularity of it, but I don't know a lot about it other than the ones people use to keep flies out.
Yeah.
So a different type of utilitarian use of it.
Angela, you had a comment in the chat from Robin Ilario.
Yeah.
Louis the 14th bed style bed, possibly for royalty or wannabes like Alva Vanderbilt.
Whoa. All right. This one, I hope I don't have to stand on a chair to get this any higher up. This is the biggest bed we're going to look at today. So it's a little shadowy, but this is an image of the great bed at Ware. If you are just looking for some fun reading material while you're like sitting in your house eating popcorn, the Wikipedia article on the Great Bed at Ware, or the Great Bed of Ware, is endlessly entertaining. But this bed is humongous, very great, also very, very famous. So this is in the collection at the Victoria and Albert Museum at this point. It's mentioned in Twelfth Night. It was brightly painted when it was originally carved. And I read a description somewhere that said that it could sleep like 10 to 11 people in it. There are no, oh, here it says dimensions: height, 7 feet 6.5, length, 10 feet 9, width 10 feet 9. This is a giant square. And I'm also going to see if I can zoom in a little bit so you can see a little of the carved detail on this, because it's great. It's a great bed. A famous and humongous bed with also a cool friend here keeping an eye on you while you sleep.
Yeah, and a couple like angel friends or something, like little background.
Yeah. And this actually has printed here the quote from Shakespeare that mentions this bed. Dated from the reign of Queen Elizabeth, drawn and engraved by Henry Shaw. And then here is another image from the same book. And this is the cradle of Henry V. I was saying to Priscilla when we were planning this event that I love this because it's a good reminder that even kings were once babies, which is a thing that maybe we don't think about often enough. And also there are surprisingly few images of cradles that I could find, although I know this is the second one we've looked at, but I had to hunt for both. And I think, again, it's because not many people, unless you are a king, are going to have like a really fancy or unusual cradle. I think it's just sort of like, yeah, this is what I have in my house, and it looks like every other cradle. And so people don't necessarily think to document them through photography or illustration. So sideways cradle of a king, looks kind of like a bread box, but with carvings. Okay.
I love how the other one, the older one, is a postcard. Like they just like.
Yes.
I love Rhode Island sometimes with their like that made me think of like when we were talking about the where you bring your mattress nowadays to dump, and like the want to have that as a postcard for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but yeah.
If anyone hasn't been to the Providence mattress dump and needs to get rid of a mattress, recommended Rhode Island experience. All right, this is a small book that I love. This is of the genre of instructional materials that are very moralistic and teach young people how to be healthy, good, moral Christians. There's a ton of stuff like this in our children's book collection, although this is from our general special collections. But the reason I have this out is that you can see some of the Victorian excitement about posture here. The previous page also has some good images of posture. Which one are you?
The Victorians are pretty ableist.
Yeah. But this shows you different things you can be doing with your spine. How very distressing, and yet how common. But this is showing you the proper and improper way to lie in bed, which also, I feel like I read an article about how it was considered healthy by some other people at the time to use a tremendous number of pillows. And so this is interesting because I'm wondering if this also was in reaction to that, to say, that is going to bend your spine. If you want to have good posture, don't use the humongous number of pillows in the bed.
Yeah. Well, also just in their clothing design, like I'm sure this was like corset era stuff.
Yes.
Like that posture being like a hugely forced, painful experience. And even in like the men's like coat cut designs, the sleeves are a different style so that you're forced to also stand in a different way. So that was like important in their, obviously, like they made this book about it.
Yeah. Actually, magazines from this era have a lot of advertisements for children's corsets, which is very alarming for the modern sensibility to think about. But the advertisements all use language around, do you want a slouching, unhealthy child, or do you want a vigorous child with good posture? Put your child in our children's corset. And so, the idea was that these things that to us sound extremely restrictive and unhealthy were supposed to be increasing, your breath and your flow of whatever to your brain, and that actually this is the way to increase health.
Yeah, and it's sort of like a weird, I'm like, it just reminded me of like shout out to another library. If you want to see corsets, the archive of the RISD Museum. They do like occasional Fridays once a month throughout the summer, like visual, and I think online too. You can see on their website. You can see their collection of corsets, which is pretty
Cool.
rad. And they go from like working class people's corsets to like very high end made ones too. But it's just like yeah, some of these were like feel like, especially one of the ones that they have, there's like, it's obviously one that one person wore all the time. Sorry, I didn't mean to drive this into corsets. It's about beds, yeah, but posture, and there's like marks
Cool.
of breast milk and like wear and tear because it was
Whoa.
the only corset that they had, and they're
Yeah.
workers or farmers, so it's obviously like
Mhm.
strange design. But it's, yeah, it is weird, like the more cleanly and weird and like closer godliness thing is like huge in this era. And so like
Yeah.
I'm just seeing all these weird connections with like clothing and lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This one with the slouching is literally using the words healthy and unhealthy
Yeah.
to describe it. So,
Yeah.
all right, I'm going to go grab something about quilts from the other end of this long, long table.
I think I see my name in the chat. Yeah, I can talk about, hold on, I'm a slow reader. I think about like the things that I'm making as like kind of like paintings for beds, and the enjoyable part of that. But there's a lot of like cool things about um yeah, creating something for in the craft world for or folk art. So like of making stuff for utilitarian use, but also for reasons of aesthetically, like it's just really beautiful. And I think there's, yeah, a lot that like last section of the book with the thing, it just made me remember like of like perfectionism and imperfectionism. And that's like a thing that I think about a lot in art that I make, and quilts for sure. But like, yeah, we can go into it more as we go along, but like not making a completely perfect quilt is like something I'm really happy about doing. Or like perfectly designed thing. But yeah, I was just answering a chat thingy, sorry.
Yeah, I figured that was what was happening as I left my headset and missed what everyone was talking about.
Yeah.
So this booklet goes with, we're going to look at some prints from a big folio. This is sort of the like informational booklet that goes in the front of it. And you can see it, this is actually just like a typescript. But this is actually something from the United States Works Progress Administration. I think this was published around 1940, but again, it doesn't have an actual publication date on it. But one of the things that was happening through the Works Progress Administration was that the United States government was paying unemployed fine artists to document folk art around the United States. So they were sending people out to essentially make color illustrations and color paintings of different kind of folk art, things like weather vanes, carousel horses. There are a lot of really interesting things that came out of that. But I think that only 2 places in the country ended up with quilt surveys being completed, as far as I could tell. There could be a lot more, and I just can't find documentation of it. But this is essentially a Works Progress Administration survey of quilts in Pennsylvania. So this is the informational booklet, History and Romance in Quilts.
Mm.
And then the prints that go along with it are really lovely. So they have traditional quilt patterns. I'll back this up a little. But they're really nice because there is documentation of a traditional quilt pattern, but then also essentially a pattern for how you could recreate this quilt yourself, and I think that that's something that's really nice thinking about quilts as like a utilitarian folk art, because, if you think, oh, go do a survey of, painters in such and such a place, people in documenting it aren't necessarily going to say, oh, and then how do you recreate this painting yourself at home? But the idea of a quilt is, this is a pattern that people use and make, but also you can do this yourself at home. And so the reproducibility of it, but also the infinite options for the ways that this could look when people are making it at home, I think is sort of reflected in an interesting way in these prints. We can look at a couple more.
Yeah, so each one ends up being unique, even if you are using the same pattern. Is a beautiful part of it. Also based on what fabric scraps you have often. Like if you're doing this, you're not like, the book doesn't come with a pack of fabric. You're just improvising a lot and being resourceful.
I really love this one.
Yeah. Very
cool.
different range of like the bed.
Yeah.
To like this type of art.
Yeah. So I have one more thing for us to look at before we move into questions. The last thing that I have is extremely large. So I'm not actually sure if it's going to fit under this camera. And perhaps the thing that might be smartest is actually for me to bring the iPad over to the print because it's that big. So I'm going to move things around real quick. You guys talk about quilts for a second.
I'm excited. Yeah. I'd also been thinking about like quilts and books a lot too, because obviously like this is a library series, but just like especially because images of a lot of quilts, if they're not recorded like that, especially if it's like home ones are not like, and I was just thinking about my favorite quilts and books, and I don't know if you've read Beloved, there's a beautiful like connection to quilting in that book, like throughout from the beginning to the end. But even the beginning talks about just like batting and quilt batting in the interior, whatnot. So I don't know, that was swirling around in my head before jumping into today's conversation. It was just like that sort of stuff. Just killing time.
So here's a big print. Here's my hand to give you an idea of how big this is. So a little big to fit under our print stand. So I'm sorry, this is a little bouncy. But these are, again, pochoir printed. So printed with layers of stencils, and they're pochoir printed Navajo blankets from the collection at the Laboratory of Anthropology, which is in the, let's see, I wrote down the name of the museum. It is in the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture in Santa Fe. And so these are lovely. These are from the 1940s. I'm going to move to another one.
It's beautiful.
They're really lovely. And I'm going to see if I can get this close enough that you can kind of see the texture of the print. Because something about seeing these in person is really amazing, because you can actually see sort of the depth of the ink that's used to print these. And so I feel like the blankets themselves are clearly stunning, but then the dimensionality of the ink used to document them is also sort of stunning in its own way.
These are paintings that the museum has, or the actual?
So the museum has the actual blankets. They have a really, really big collection of Navajo blankets. They have, their collection includes some of the oldest Navajo blankets that are in existence. I think they have some that date back to the 1700s. And I have notes that are far away that I cannot grab because I'm holding this iPad, but they have a really amazing collection there. And so these, again, my wild guess is that color printing at the time was not necessarily reflecting the vibrancy and intricacy of the blankets in the way that they were interested in. But also in the 1920s to 1940s, roughly, there was a movement not dissimilar from how people are interested in hand printing and letterpress now in the United States, but it was sort of, oh, everything's, mechanized. And so having things that are sort of a hand printed material object was considered beautiful and a nice way to document artwork. So I think that also might be part of why these were printed in this way instead of being photographed. But those are some really lovely Navajo blankets for you. All right, and now I can see my notes, and it looks like 1750 is the oldest Navajo blankets that they have at the Laboratory of Anthropology. And that's a museum that still exists and that you can go visit if you're in Santa Fe. It's a very cool place. Cool. Questions? Conversation?
Yeah.
Thank you both. This is amazing. Everybody, please feel free to put questions in the chat as you have them. I had a question that I was like furiously typing out, but since folks don't have questions quite yet, I'll just ask it for fun. Priscilla, I would love to first hear more about quilts and literature / fantasy or dream quilts that you've heard about, thought about, or ones that really had an impression on you. And then also, I would love to hear about your process for creating quilts. Where do you even start? With an idea, with a fabric, with a pattern? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I was thinking about it because of like quilting as like memory keeping and or like sort of I don't know, it's part of the part that I like a lot is the process practice of it. And I know that is something that like, there can be like generational learning of in sewing or in weaving, like these Navajo blankets I assume are woven pieces too. And so there's like a sort of like meditative process of going little by little and piecing them together. And from what I feel like I like about that sort of thing is sort of like art wise doing like healing or like some sort of holistic element to like it just for the process of it, or doing it in circle and or sewing in like different symbols. Like I know that I don't know their tradition, this indigenous tradition, but I know like it is similar to ones that I am like more aware of, like Ecuador, Guatemalan. I'm not Guatemalan, but I've like just know a bit of like that that is connected to a lot of their spiritual work of like these zigzags are mountains ranges. Some like in some cultural like symbolism is like similar. So I'm like reading it in that way, but like, and that is connected to other parts of like even just dreamscapes. And why I brought up Beloved is because that comes up a lot. Like the whole book is like talking to the dead. And a lot of like indigenous cultures, like spiritual work is like ancestor work is like talking to like your different spirit realms to like just be part of the material world. And I think also with beds, especially of like these historical ones, maybe less so the elite colonial royalty people, but like we're like, their bed is a place of death too. Like we're like, that was where like you spend like your like at later, like, yeah, there's not like a hospital nearby. That was where doctors come to you sort of thing. So there's like a lot of like,
Mhm.
that was like a place of departure from, or like transitioning to next realm too. So I think
Mhm.
that like ends up coming up a lot in quilt culture and these types of cultures, which is why I always get like, when I see like these design elements in like popular like anthropology or like Urban Outfitters of things. And I know that's like, yeah, like another tangent, but like it's just there's so much more in these like shapes that like should be there should be reparations around or like respect towards
Yes.
or like I don't know, just knowledge about like so I think like that I think about that when I make my things, even though I'm like not like I don't come from a lineage of quilting. I do come from my grandma made crocheted blankets like for everyone. And so that's like just like a common economic self-sufficiency on the feminine side of my family of like lineage of like doing work at home to support the family like and that happens a lot with these things. So I think about that a lot and like and I just like think about it as like making a big painting for my for the bed space um is what like is the most like why does it have to be a painting on a wall or like just in a space like a museum space and I think like we can decorate in a way that's like for like surfaces and stuff too. Um, but I don't know if that answered all the question, but I think I rambled enough about it. For that.
It was
One,
amazing. Thank
yeah.
you. We have one other question-ish. I was from Sarah Weed. I was thinking about how other cultures have contributed to bedding trends in the US. Futons from Japan, a down comforter from Poland, India print bedspreads. Any others?
Hmm,
That's such a cool question.
that's a good question.
Yeah.
I would love to think about that for a week and then get back to you with like researched items. Hmm, I mean, there's here like a small one from here is like there's mats that are made from a tree and I forget the tree's name, but basically it's like ones that you put under your mattress instead of the box spring. So
Mm.
I don't know when the era of when box springs were invented, but I think that was like just like a more stabilizing support on top of like a string flat frame. And so it's making me think, yeah, everyone has different solutions for like the skeleton of a bed too. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know.
I don't have any answers, but I love that question so much.
Mhm.
And I just can't think of anything off the top of my head necessarily.
Yeah, it's the origin story of bunk beds.
I would like to know. I would like to know. I can't really find much uh, documentation of bunk beds just in books and magazines before like 1940s, 1950s, although I'm sure that they were invented before then.
Hmm.
Probably.
Yeah, I'm sure. Maybe it was like an army thing, like you have to fit
Oh,
more things in a smaller space. Or I feel
yeah.
like a school thing or like an institutional system
Yeah.
thing.
I wonder if it was post World War II when everyone had been sleeping in bunks in the army and then was like, oh, these are fun. I should put these in my house.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
hope
yeah,
someone who's here knows all about the history of bunk beds and is dropping it in the chat right now.
yeah, I know. They're like, let me speak.
Well, I'm a bunk bed expert. Oh,
Uh,
trundle beds, someone's mentioning.
there we go.
What is a
Yeah.
trundle bed? Please tell me.
Oh, trundle beds are great. It's a bed that goes under your bed. So the same way that you might like slide a box with blankets under your bed, it's just a little bed that wheels out. And I grew up in a neighborhood that had a lot of identical duplexes, and a lot of the kids who lived in the duplexes, they just had like one long, thin bedroom, and those kids all had trundle beds. And I remember as a kid being like, everyone else gets a trundle bed. How come I don't have a trundle bed?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it often, like, the littlest kid, when you like moved out of your crib or cradle, you would move onto the trundle bed because you also can't fall off of it. So it's like where the littlest kid would sleep.
Yeah, that's funny. So many memories of like, yeah, bed stuff. I remember the first time I saw a bunk bed too, or like
Yeah.
maybe that's why I brought that up. I was like, I want that. Sort
Yeah.
of also as a child.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that I made us look at that bed with the carved swans was that I was very interested in canopy beds as a child, which was like the opposite of what bedrooms were like at our house. Or I was just like, that's the height of elegance. Those are girls who are princesses. They have their own room, and their bed is like an elegant tent. It
Yeah.
was the fanciest thing I could think of.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Robin Alario is here with the research support, but no definitive info on origins. Thank you, Robin.
Yeah.
Well, it's just about time to finish up. We don't have any further questions.
Right.
Final thoughts from both of you?
I don't have any final thoughts. If people come up with questions after this, they're like, oh, I forgot to ask my burning question about trundle beds. Or if you just have more questions about any of the items we looked at today, if you go to the Sleep Mode webpage on the PPL website, there is a button there that says email the curator. And that's me. So if you hit that button, that'll just automatically send an email to me. So I'm happy to tell you more information about any of the things we've looked at today. Or if you had a burning question that you didn't feel comfortable asking or didn't remember until later, again, just get in touch.
Oh, we have one more question for Priscilla as you come to your final thoughts too. Kate Wells would love to hear your thoughts about children's blankies.
Yeah. Okay. I love them. I mean, I think they're great because there's a lot of like first year tactile memory as a child can be something that you're used to daily. So I think that's why I like that attachment to, or a lot like your kid's blanket becomes like, that's Snoopy character, like you just carry it. And I have like blankets from like my like from forever, from when I was a kid. I have like a blanket that's like an aunt's blanket, like, so there's like a cool like not only like memory of it, but just like always a story that can lead to like comforting things, I think, for kids, and in terms of like blankies. And I like when I'm asked to make one. Sometimes you stitch like their name in it in the corner, and it's like it's just a fun sort of like thing that people can like have in their possession, in their like possession of like things to pass down. Maybe it was someone else's and you got it later. So it's just, again, like the memory parts in textiles like can be so cool for me, and that is like definitely one at that age where all your senses are just beginning. Like it might even smell like a particular like caregiver or like sort of space that you're at, or yeah. So I think they're cool. Yeah, it's my comment. And I guess I don't know if there are any more questions, but yeah, no, this was lovely. It's stuff that swirls around my head. And I was telling Angela, like I have like weird mattress family stories of like my dad dragging a mattress through the airport his first time that he moved to the first time that he came to the US. And like that's a long story, but it involved like a hoarding uncle that was like, and so there's just like weird things that like are related to design that I'm like going through in memory lane. And then that's just like a fun thing that you can think about or find, if not yourself, in stories for sure, like beloved, or even like, yeah, all kinds of stories. I don't know.
That's beautiful. Thank you both so much. Everyone will see in the chat that we have links to the Sleep Mode exhibit page, Angela's excellent audio essays for this exhibit, yeah, and our next curator's conversation, and a shout out to an event that's happening this week for those interested in quilting. And many thanks, Priscilla, for your recommendation of Sisters in Stitches. All of that is in the chat. Thank you, everybody. As Angela was saying, please feel free to reach out to her directly, and stay tuned for the next Sleep Mode. Oh, and please fill out the evaluation form. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.